loveless marriage just to make sure I could be with Lena every day.
Mark Consuelos finally said the quiet part out loud, but not in the way people expected. After nearly 30 years with Kelly Ripa, he joked that he would stay in a loveless marriage for one reason: their dog, Lena. It sounded ridiculous.
On August 11th, during a pre-recorded episode of Live with Kelly and Mark Consuelos said something that would end up traveling a lot further than a Tuesday morning talk show segment usually does. He and Kelly Ripa were talking about a real piece of Pennsylvania legislation, House Bill 97, which proposes new rules for how couples split custody of pets after a divorce. It was a light news segment, the kind daytime television runs all the time, mixing a policy story with a bit of personality from the hosts. But then Kelly turned conversation toward their own dog, and Mark said a line that would end up in headlines for days: "I would stay in a loveless marriage just to make sure I could be with Lena every day." Kelly, without missing a beat, shot back, "Is that all you're asking for, is a loveless marriage? Because that can be arranged." Done. It is a funny exchange. It is also, on its face, a strange thing for a man married to the same woman for close to 30 years to say on national television. But strip away the punchline, and what you actually have is not a marriage in crisis. What you have is two people who have been together long enough, and public long enough, to know exactly how far a joke can be pushed before it needs to be pulled back. This video is not about whether Mark Consuelos and Kelly Ripa are secretly unhappy. They are not, and nothing in the public record suggests otherwise. This is about what that joke, and the 3 decades of documented history behind it, actually tell us about how a famous marriage survives this long in front of an audience. To understand why the joke landed the way it did, it helps to know exactly what was being discussed. Pennsylvania's proposed bill would treat pets more like children in a divorce, introducing shared custody schedules and cost-sharing arrangements instead of simply assigning the animal to one owner like a piece of furniture. Kelly explained on air that the law would elevate pets to something closer to family members in the eyes of a divorce court. That framing is what opened the door for Mark's comment. The show was not spontaneous in every sense. It had been recorded before Kelly's extended absence while she recovered from gum graft surgery. But the exchange between them played out the way their exchanges usually do. Kelly set up the topic. Mark took it somewhere personal and a little absurd, and Kelly matched him. After Mark's initial comment, the two of them kept going. He said that if Lena were ever taken from him in a hypothetical split, he would lie awake at night wondering about her. Kelly, in classic form, suggested he'd really be lying awake wondering if some other man was petting her. It is worth pointing out how specific in practice his rhythm is. Neither of them stumbled over the bit. There was no visible discomfort, no forced laughter, no sense that either person had wandered into uncomfortable territory. It read the way two people talking at their own kitchen table might read, if the kitchen table happened to have 3 cameras pointed at it. Lena is a Maltese and Shih Tzu mix, and the story of how she joined the family is itself part of the show's history. The couple did not go looking for a dog. They found her through a segment on Live called Happy Pets, a recurring feature where adoptable animals are shown to the audience. Kelly and Mark saw Lena during that March 2021 broadcast and decided on the spot to bring her home. Kelly has said her main worry at the time was how Lena would get along with the family's older dog, Chewy, as Shih Tzu the family had adopted years earlier. Also through a segment on the show, back in 2007, the 2 dogs got along immediately. Kelly has also mentioned that their kids wanted to name the new dog Leia as a Star Wars reference to go along with Chewy, though the name Lena went out instead. Chewy's story adds real weight to why Lena means what she does to this family. In February 2025, Kelly and Mark told their audience that Chewy had died at 17 years old. Mark called it one of the hardest things they had gone through as a married couple. Kelly, visibly emotional, talked about what Chewy had given the family over the years, including being there as each of their children left home for the next stage of their lives. That detail matters, because it shows that the family's dogs have not been incidental pets stashed at home. They've been present on camera and off, through actual family transitions. 3 kids growing up and eventually moving out of public and prolonged public life. And now, an empty nest. Lena, adopted in 2021, arrived right around the time the youngest of the couple's 3 children was approaching adulthood. The custody joke about her was not built from nothing. It was built on a dog who has genuinely occupied an outsized place in the household during a specific, real period of change. Their relationship did not start the way most long celebrity marriages get described in a highlight reel. Kelly Ripa had already been on All My Children for close to 5 years, playing Haley Vaughn, when Mark Consuelos was cast in 1995 as Mateo Santos, a role written specifically to be her character's love interest. Kelly has said that before they even formally met, she had already seen a photograph of him during the casting process and had what she has described as an overwhelming sense that she was looking at her future. She has told this story more than once over the years, including in interviews where she admitted she does not typically believe in that kind of premonition, but has made an exception for this one moment. Their actual working relationship began with a screen test, and the chemistry translated quickly from the show to real life. It did not, however, go entirely smoothly. Less than a year into dating, the couple broke up, by Kelly's own account. The split did not last long. They got back together the day before they eloped, a timeline she has described in interviews as almost accidental, tied to a chance reunion at a taping of Mother's Day special for Live, with Regis and Kathy Lee. A fan on that show had said her dream was to meet the two of them because they were her favorite characters on All My Children. That reunion, however small, appears to have reignited things between Mark and Kelly. A week later, according to Kelly, Mark suggested they go to Vegas. They did. On May 1st, 1996, they eloped and got married in Las Vegas, keeping the marriage a secret from most of their castmates for a period afterward. Mark reportedly stayed on a fellow castmate's sofa around this time, and that castmate was one of the few people who knew the two of them were not just dating, but already married. Neither of them has pretended this was an easy start. Kelly has openly said their first year of marriage was difficult, describing constant fighting. She has also described a moment where the two of them essentially made a decision together. They were in the marriage for the long haul, so they might as well figure out how to make it enjoyable rather than simply enduring it. That decision, made sometime in that rocky first year, appears to have set the tone for how they've approached the relationship publicly ever since. It is not framed as a fairy tale that never had friction. It is framed by both of them as something they had to build on purpose. The kids came quickly by most standards. Michael was born on June 2nd, 1997, just over a year after the wedding. Lola followed on June 16th, 2001, and Joaquin was born on February 24th, 2003. That means Mark and Kelly were raising 3 young children while both of their careers were still very much taking shape, and while their marriage itself was still relatively new. There was no long runway of being an established, low-profile couple before fame and parenthood arrived. It all happened close together. Kelly and Mark continued taping All My Children together until 2002, when Kelly stepped back from the soap to take over as co-host of what was then Live, with Regis and Kelly officially starting in that role in February 2001, working alongside Regis Philbin. Mark, meanwhile, continued building his own acting career separately, appearing in various television and film projects over the following 2 decades, most notably later taking on a role of Hiram Lodge on Riverdale. For years, the two of them operated on largely separate professional tracks. Kelly became one of the most recognizable faces in American daytime television, first alongside Regis Philbin, later through a series of other co-hosts, including Michael Strahan and Ryan Seacrest. Mark built a steady acting career, occasionally appearing on Kelly's show as a guest, but not as a fixture of it. That changed in 2023. On February 16th of that year, Mark Consuelos was formally announced as Ryan Seacrest's successor as Kelly's co-host, and the show was renamed Live with Kelly and Mark. This was not a small adjustment. For the first time since their soap opera days in the 1990s, Mark and Kelly were sharing a set on a daily basis, in front of a live audience and national television cameras, 5 mornings a week. Working together as actors playing love interests in the 1990s is one kind of professional intimacy. Sitting beside your spouse every single weekday morning, live, filling airtime, reacting in real time, and doing so for years running is a completely different kind of pressure. It requires a level of coordination, patience, and comfort with each other's rhythms that a lot of marriages never have a test. Since Mark joined full-time, the show's tone has leaned into exactly the kind of banner that produced the Lena joke. This is not a couple performing careful, polished affection for the cameras. It's two people who talk over each other, needle each other, and openly discuss the mundane friction of actually living together. In a separate segment discussed publicly, the two of them argued about whose job it was to let the dogs out in the morning, a small domestic detail that Kelly herself called one of the real challenges of living with pets. In another episode, they discuss a study claiming couples who date for at least 3 years before marrying are significantly less likely to divorce. Mark and Kelly, having dated less than a year before eloping, did not exactly fit that model, and they said so, joking about how little data they actually had on each other before getting married. Kelly admitted she would hate to find out 3 decades and that the data they had gathered on each other was wrong. Mark, just as quickly, told her he had no regrets. This pattern repeats across years of their on-air appearances, a factual or newsy prompt, followed by one of them turning it personal, followed by the other one matching or topping it. It's a rhythm that requires real trust to execute, because it only works if both people know where the other one's actual limits are. A joke about a loveless marriage only reads as funny, rather than alarming, if the audience and the two people making the joke both understand that it is not describing anything real. Mark and Kelly have had almost 30 years, and more recently, several years of live daily television to calibrate exactly where that line is. There's a detail that's easy to skip past, but matters for understanding why a joke about a dog carries the weight it does. Their 3 children are grown. Michael, the oldest, was around 29 at the time of the Lena segment. Lola was 25. Joaquin, the youngest, was 23. All 3 have moved into adulthood and, based on public reporting, out of the family home. That is a real transition for any set of parents, regardless of how famous they are. The daily structure that children provide, school schedules, activities, the noise and routine of Full House, doesn't just disappear quietly. It leaves a gap. Kelly has spoken in interviews over the years about parenting and about the strange mix of glamour and ordinary chaos that came with raising 3 kids while also working in television. Mark has spoken about the same experience from his side. Now that all 3 children are adults, the shape of their household has changed, and Lena's role inside it has become more visible in their public conversations. When Chewy died in February 2025, Kelly specifically noted that the older dog had been present as each of their children left home for the next chapter of their lives. That is a detail she chose to share herself, and it points to something fairly ordinary. Pets often take on more emotional weight in a household once children move out. None of this requires speculation about their inner emotional state. It is simply a fact pattern that's consistent with what a lot of parents experience during an empty nest period, and it happens to line up with the timing of when Lena joined their family and when the custody joke was made. None of this means Mark Consuelos was making some kind of coded confession about his marriage. He was making a joke on a show built around him and his wife making jokes about their life together in response to a real news story about pet custody law. What makes the joke work, and what makes it worth examining at all, is the amount of real, documented history sitting underneath it. A couple that eloped after less than a year of dating, whether the genuinely difficult first year of marriage by their own admission, raised 3 children while building 2 separate careers, spent over 20 years in largely separate professional lanes, and then chose, in their late 40s and 50s, to share a television set together every single weekday, has earned the right to make jokes that a newer couple couldn't get away with. The joke isn't evidence of trouble. It's evidence of exactly the opposite. A level of comfort and shared history deep enough that a line like, "I'd stay for the dog," reads as funny rather than as a red flag to Kelly, to their audience, and apparently to Mark himself. There's also a simpler explanation that's easy to overlook amid all the analysis. This is quite literally their job. Live with Kelly and Mark runs on exactly this kind of material. Every day, the show needs content, and Mark and Kelly have built their entire on-air identity around minding their real marriage, their real kids, and their real pets for that content. A bit about pet custody law was never going to stay a dry policy discussion on this particular show. It was always going to end up personal, because that's the format they built together on purpose since Mark joined full-time in 2023. So what did Mark Consuelos admit? Based on everything that's actually on the record, he didn't admit to anything resembling marital trouble. What the moment reveals, when you look at the documented 30-year timeline behind it, is a couple that has been publicly testing and refining their own comfort level with each other since they were in their early 20s. They fought constantly in year one and said so. They built separate careers for 2 decades without either person's public identity swallowing the other's. They chose later in life to combine their careers directly by co-hosting a live daily show together, which is its own significant test of marriage. And they fill that show with the same kind of unvarnished, slightly blunt humor that got them through their early years. Only now it happens to be broadcast to a national audience every morning. The Lena joke isn't a secret slipping out. It's a habit, one built over 3 decades, of turning the real texture of their marriage, arguments over pet custody laws, sleepless nights worrying about a dog, disagreements over who lets the dogs out, into material their audience recognizes because it isn't that far removed from ordinary domestic life. Mark Consuelos didn't reveal that his marriage to Kelly Ripa is secretly loveless. What the record actually shows is a couple that eloped fast, fought hard early on, built careers on their own terms, raised 3 kids to adulthood, and ended up 3 decades later still choosing to sit next to each other on live television every single morning. If anything needed admitting, it was already sitting there in the timeline the whole time.